It all comes down to precision, a stroke played with absolute mastery. Now, I need you to lean in and listen very closely to what I am about to say. What you are about to experience is far more than a simple summary of a tennis match. This is the detailed breakdown of a sporting earthquake, a seismic tremor that ignited in the sun-drenched California desert, rattled the elite locker rooms of the professional tour, and triggered pure chaos in the streets of Manila. Nếu bạn nghĩ rằng mình đã nắm rõ kịch bản cho giải đấu năm nay, bạn đã nhầm. For the BNP Paribas Open at Indian Wells, it is time to shred the script and start over. Discard every one of your predictions because the world of tennis just bore witness to something truly breathtaking. We are talking about the systematic and total destruction of an immovable force. The world number 3, the ice-cold queen of Kazakhstan, Elena Rybakina, stepped onto the court expecting nothing less than a routine victory. She arrived as a former Wimbledon champion. She is the reigning Australian Open title holder, a 6-foot colossus possessing a serve that routinely shatters the sound barrier and crushes the spirit of anyone across the net. However, the person waiting for her on the other side was not just another face on the tour. It was a 20-year-old Filipina phenomenon who has stopped merely knocking on the door of greatness. She is currently kicking it off its hinges. Alexandra just left the entire world in a state of shock. And she did not achieve this through a stroke of luck or a random fluke. She did it by marching straight into the lion's den, staring down one of the most intimidating forces in modern tennis, and methodically, ruthlessly tearing her game apart. To truly grasp the sheer scale of what took place today, we have to go back and properly set the stage. You have to feel the heavy atmosphere of Indian Wells. There is a reason they call it the 5th Grand Slam, and the pressure there is absolutely suffocating. The air is bone dry, which causes the ball to cut through the atmosphere with a terrifying amount of speed. But the moment that ball strikes the ground, the rough, high-friction surface of the court grips it, forcing a high bounce and slowing it down just enough to turn every rally into a brutal test of physical will. It is a court that demands more than just raw power. It requires a supreme level of tactical intelligence. Heading into this specific clash, the tennis purists and the betting houses had already completely dismissed Alexandra Eala. They took one look at the statistics and the physical matchup and they actually laughed at the possibility of an upset. On one side, you have Rybakina, armed with flat, piercing ground strokes, and a first serve that feels like trying to catch a supersonic missile. On the other side, you have Eala, a player who has enjoyed a meteoric rise through the rankings to reach a career high of number 31, yet standing significantly shorter and surviving on pure grit, speed, and defensive prowess. On paper, it looked like a classic mismatch. It looked like a total slaughter was about to take place on center court, but there was an electric current surging through the stadium even before the first ball was struck because Alexandra did not walk out there by herself. You could hear the roar in the stands. You could feel the heavy vibrations in the desert air. She had the entire strength of a nation supporting her every move. Thousands of incredibly passionate Filipino fans filled the bleachers, waving their flags, chanting her name, and creating an environment that felt more like a championship football stadium than a quiet, polite country club tennis match. Eala thrives on that specific energy. While Rybakina appeared entirely stone-faced, looking almost bored by the entire spectacle, Eala was bouncing on the balls of her feet, her eyes wide as she soaked in the electricity from the crowd. When the opening set finally began, the worst-case scenario for Eala seemed to be unfolding in real time. Rybakina came out firing with a terrifying level of aggression and clinical power. Her first serves were consistently clocking in the high 100 and teens, hitting the lines with surgical precision. Eala was struggling just to get her racket on the ball. Rybakina was breezing through her service games in under 90 seconds. It was a clinical masterclass in first-strike tennis, and when Eala stepped up to serve, Rybakina was standing 2 feet inside the baseline, taking the ball remarkably early and punishing every second serve with flat, lethal return winners. In what felt like the blink of an eye, Rybakina had already secured a double-break lead. The commentators were essentially writing Eala's obituary for the tournament right then and there. The once boisterous crowd grew eerily quiet, It looked exactly like the blowout everyone had predicted. Rybakina took the first set 6-3, and she appeared completely untouchable. But this is the exact moment where the narrative shifts. This is where a good tennis player evolves into a great one. A lesser athlete would have folded under that kind of pressure. A younger, less experienced player would have looked at the scoreboard, seen the giant across the net, accepted the loss, and started packing her bags. But not Alexandra. Between the first and second sets, Eala did not panic for even a single second. She sat in her chair, draped a towel over her head, took a long, deep breath, and completely rewired her entire game plan. She realized that trying to match Rybakina's sheer pace was nothing short of professional suicide. Rybakina absolutely thrives on pace. If you hit the ball hard and flat at her, she simply uses your own power against you, redirecting the ball into the open court before you can even recover your footing. So, Eala made the executive decision to stop giving her that pace. She decided she was going to drag the Ice Queen into the mud. As the second set opened, the tactical genius of Alexandra Eala was on full display. When Rybakina served, Eala stopped trying to hold her ground at the baseline. She backed up significantly. She stepped so far back she was practically standing with the line judges in the California desert heat. This gave her that extra fraction of a second needed to read the massive serve. She stopped trying to blast return winners and instead focused solely on getting the ball back deep into the center of the court. Once the rally actually started, Eala completely altered the geometry of the entire match. Instead of hitting flat drives, Eala began rolling heavy, looping topspin shots deep into the corners of the court. Because the Indian Wells surface is so gritty, those heavy topspin balls would hit the ground and kick up violently, jumping right into Rybakina's shoulders. Rybakina is incredibly tall, which means her natural strike zone is much lower. When you force her to hit balls up around her neck, she simply cannot generate that same level of devastating, flat power. Eala forced Rybakina to generate all of her own pace off high, dead balls, and suddenly the unstoppable machine began to malfunction. Rybakina started spraying forehands wide and netting her backhands. The frustration on the Kazakhstani player's face became clearly visible, but Eala did not stop there. Oh no, she chose that moment to really turn the knife. Recognizing that forward movement is the one tiny crack in Rybakina's armor, she adjusted. Eala began to employ the drop shot with cruel and merciless perfection. She would pin Rybakina deep behind the baseline with a heavy topspin forehand, wait for her to plant her feet, and then suddenly slice a delicate, feathery drop shot that barely cleared the net. The crowd watched in absolute awe as the world number 3 was forced to lunge and scramble. She was forced to sprint awkwardly forward over and over again. The intense desert heat combined with these brutal physical sprints began to drain the energy from Rybakina's legs. The giant was breathing heavily, and she was starting to crumble. Eala broke Rybakina's serve early in the second set, and the entire stadium erupted in a thunderous cheer as the Filipino fans smelled blood in the water. Riding that massive wave of momentum, Eala defended like an impenetrable wall, tracking down impossible shots and driving Rybakina into a state of total collapse. Eala successfully captured the second set. Then came the third set, a segment of tennis that will undoubtedly be analyzed for years to come as an absolute war of attrition between two titans. Rybakina even took a medical timeout before the final set, stepping off the court to clear her head and attempt to cool down the momentum of the fiery Filipina. When she finally returned to the court, she looked completely revitalized and ready for one last stand. She rediscovered her monstrous first serve, and for the first 6 games of the deciding set, neither player yielded even a single inch. The score stood at 3 games all, and the tension was suffocatingly high because every individual point felt like a championship match point. The turning point and the moment of absolute truth arrived with Eala serving at 3-4, when Rybakina suddenly unleashed 3 unbelievable return winners in a row. Flat lasers flew right down the line, giving her a triple breakpoint advantage at love 40. This was supposed to be the exact moment the world number 3 asserted her dominance, broke the underdog serve, and closed out the match. The stadium was dead silent, but the blood in Alexandra Eala's veins was made of pure ice as she stared down the possibility of an exit. Facing love 40, she played the service game of her life, starting with a massive kick serve out wide that forced an error to bring the score to 15-40. Then came a grueling 25-shot rally where Eala simply refused to miss, covering every inch of the baseline until Rybakina finally cracked and hit a backhand long to make it 30-40. On the third breakpoint, something truly unthinkable occurred against one of the most dangerous and consistent returners on the planet. Facing a breakpoint that could effectively end her tournament run, Alexandra Eala chose to serve and volley with total confidence. She delivered a vicious slice serve out wide, sprinted forward to the net, and calmly put away a forehand volley into the wide-open court. Deuce was called, and the crowd completely lost their minds at that stroke of tactical brilliance and pure, unadulterated bravery. Eala saved the game to bring the score to 4-all, and in that exact moment, you could see the fight leave Rybakina's eyes. The mental toll of having that triple breakpoint snatched away was simply too much, and in the very next game, Eala pounced on her opportunity. She returned with vicious depth, stepping inside the baseline on the second serve, and depriving Rybakina of any room to breathe. At 15-40, Eala held double match point on Rybakina's serve, and the final rally served as a perfect summary of the entire encounter. Rybakina, feeling desperate and cornered, stepped in and struck a massive inside-out forehand. It was the kind of heavy shot that would have been a clean winner against 99% of the women currently playing on the professional tour. Eala was caught moving the wrong way, but she scrambled and skidded completely out of the frame on the hardcourt, throwing up a desperate, towering defensive lob. The ball hung in the dry desert air for what felt like an eternity, while the entire stadium held its collective breath in anticipation. Rybakina camped under it, setting her feet for a high forehand put away that looked like the easiest shot she had seen all day long. However, the pressure, the exhaustion, and the relentless spirit of Alexandra had shattered her focus, and Rybakina buried the ball straight into the bottom of the net. Game, set, and match to Alexandra Eala. The second the ball hit the net, Eala dropped her racket and fell to her knees, burying her face in her hands as the tears began to flow, and the stadium exploded into a deafening roar. It was a profound collision of pure shock from the tennis establishment and overwhelming jubilation from the Filipino faithful. An entire nation was moved to tears as they watched their brightest star achieve the impossible on one of the grandest stages in the sport. Rybakina crossed to the net quickly, offered a perfunctory handshake, and marched off the court, visibly fuming at the outcome. Meanwhile, Eala remained behind, taking every possible second to soak in what was undoubtedly the greatest moment of her young professional career. When you take a hard look at the final statistics, the narrative of this incredible match becomes crystal clear to everyone watching. Rybakina committed 54 unforced errors, an unheard-of number for a player of her elite world-class caliber. However, those were not truly unforced. They were extracted by the relentless pressure and tactical variety of Alexandra Eala. Eala constructed an incredible defensive wall and played a miraculously clean match, with very few mistakes of her own. She won nearly 60% of the points played on Rybakina's second serve, a statistic that perfectly illustrates her tactical aggression. This victory is going to send massive shockwaves through the world rankings and the elite locker rooms alike. Alexandra Eala is no longer just knocking on the door of the top 20. She is effectively tearing the hinges off the entrance. Beyond the ranking points, this match sends a terrifying and clear message to every other player currently on the professional tour. She has proven she can step onto the world's biggest stages, look the most intimidating opponents in the eye, and outsmart them. She can outrun them, outlast them, and ultimately outplay them when the lights are at their brightest and the pressure is highest. For Elena Rybakina, this loss is an incredibly bitter pill to swallow as she prepares for her next major challenge in the season. She must return to the drawing board before the Miami Open and find answers for when her power game is completely neutralized. But today does not belong to the former champion. Today belongs entirely to the people and the spirit of the Philippines. Today belongs to a 20-year-old athlete who refused to back down, even when the odds were stacked heavily against her. Alexandra Eala authored a masterpiece of resilience and proved that heart and mind can overcome even the most raw physical power. Now that the draw has opened up, the only question left is who will be brave enough to step up and try to stop her.